Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for Tuesday, September 3rd, 2019. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about the latest film and TV news. My name is Ben Pearson. I'm the senior writer at SlashFilm.com, and I am joined on today's episode by Slash Film weekend editor Brad Oman.
Hey, that's me.
And writers Hoai-Tran
Hey, everyone.
and Chris Evangelista.
Hello, folks.
All right, guys, let's jump into the news. I think we're probably going to do a water cooler episode this week, talking about what we were doing over Labor Day and all that stuff, but Peter is covering a theme park event today, so let's talk about some new stuff. Chris, I think right before the holiday weekend, some news broke about Richard Linklater's next movie. What do we know about this film?
Yes, so Richard Linklater is doing a adaptation of Merrily We Roll Along, which is a Stephen Sondheim musical. And much like he did with Boyhood, where he shot that over a period of about 12 years, he is going to shoot this film over a period of 20 years. At least that's what the report says. For some reason, I feel like this isn't true, but it is yet to be debunked. But the play, the musical, is set over a course of 20 years, and it follows this playwright as he becomes a famous Hollywood screenwriter. And I guess Richard Linklater wants to do this literally, where instead of just having the film take place over 20 years, it's literally going to be shot over 20 years, and 20 years from now we'll see it.
Okay.
If we're still here.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, that raises a lot of questions about like the future of entertainment and like, are movies even going to be, a consumable thing in the same way that they are right now in 20 years? That's like, it sounds like an ambitious project on several fronts, but maybe the most ambitious of them all is just the assumption that, this kind of thing will actually be released 20 years from now. I'm wondering, Chris, have you seen this play before? I know you have seen a few here and there, right?
No, I have not seen this one.
Has anybody here seen this? Because I've never even heard of this project before.
I can't say
Nope.
I have seen it.
Okay, so I guess just I'm going to open the floor to you guys. Like, what do you think about the idea of shooting a movie in real time over 20 years? Like, aside from the documentary series, I think it's Michael Apted that does the 7 Up or the Up series, like every 7 years, I think it is. He reconvenes the same group of people that he's been interviewing for like the past absurd number of years. I don't have the numbers in front of me right now, but other than that, I think this might be like one of the longer movies like to ever go into production. What do you guys make of this?
Well, I mean, let's not forget that Boyhood did pretty much the same thing.
Yeah. But I mean, that's 12 years and this is 20. And I would argue that like the movie going infrastructure as it exists right now is like in a more delicate place than it was over the 12 years that he shot Boyhood. But what do you think, HT?
I am a fan of Richard Linklater, but I do think that he pulled off this shooting a big project over time conceit best with his Before trilogy. He shot the first one back or released the first one back in 1995, and then the sequel, Before Sunset, came out in 2004, before the trilogy finished off with the 2013 film Before Midnight. And I feel like because the Before trilogy kind of came together more organically and more spontaneously, it has that authenticity that I really value in Linklater films. Whereas Boyhood, I enjoyed for the experiment, but I can't say that I would say that's one of his best films. So I don't know. He also already won the Oscar for Boyhood. So does he need to prove anything more? Maybe he just likes experimenting with the format, which, props to him. But it just feels like he's done it already so well the first time around that he doesn't need to do this again. Yeah.
And time, the idea of time has been something that he's played with a lot as a filmmaker. So it's certainly something that, as you guys have mentioned, is right there in his wheelhouse. But Chris, this movie is supposed to star Ben Platt and Beanie Feldstein. What do you think about those two as like rising stars and like potential, will people remember who they are or be interested in them 20 years from now?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I like both of them. I think they're both pretty great, but this whole thing just sounds like a logistical nightmare to me. I mean, on one hand, I appreciate that Linklater wants to try something new. I mean, that's really cool, but I just can't help but think like, heaven forbid, but like what if one of these actors gets in like a like a car crash or something, like, and they're, what if they like retire from acting? It's like, I'm done with acting. Like, what is he gonna do? Like, I can't imagine how this is gonna play out. And again, like we said to begin with, I can't imagine anything being around 20 years from now. I'm having a hard time, like 5 years from now, picturing that, let alone 20. Like, I just picture like a movie theater in like the Mad Max Fury Road wasteland, and like it's like has like the marquee. It's like, playing tonight, Merrily we roll around. We ride our fucking dune buggies up with like bones all over them.
Hey, that sounds kind of awesome, Chris. So
I mean,
yeah,
I guess. Like, we pay with like teeth. Like, there's no like money anymore. We just like throw a bunch of teeth down. Like, 1 ticket, please.
Oh, wow. Well, let's hope that we don't end up living in that future. But let's turn our attention to the future, or the past, actually, in a galaxy far, far away, a long time ago. Brad, Star Wars, The Rise of Skywalker. Let's talk about it. You wrote 2 articles about this film that I think have some stuff that's worth discussing. First up, J.J. Abrams talked about how Star Wars The Last Jedi didn't really ruin his plans for The Rise of Skywalker. So what did he say, and what do you think he means by that?
Yes, well, as we all know, Star Wars The Last Jedi is very good, and there has been no dissension about that whatsoever online or anywhere else in pop culture. But there is a small contingent of radical Star Wars fans who think that The Last Jedi requires some kind of fixing or repairs by J.J. Abrams in order to properly complete the Star Wars saga, or the Skywalker saga, as it were. However, J.J. Abrams was recently asked about whether or not he needed to do any sort of redirection or anything like that regarding the story for The Rise of Skywalker after the events of The Last Jedi. And Abrams said briefly, quote, "The story that we're telling, the story that we started to conceive when we did The Force Awakens, was allowed to continue. Episode 8 didn't really derail anything that we were thinking about." And so he's not necessarily specific with regards to what storyline or any overarching plot ideas they might have had that they hoped would be picked up and carry over from The Force Awakens. But it might be safe to assume that he's talking about, one, Rey's parentage, which it has been a very hot-button topic for Star Wars fans as to whether or not Kylo Ren is telling the truth about her parents being nobodies, or whether or not she has some ties to either the Skywalkers or the Kenobis or Palpatine or any number of Star Wars characters that could have helped her become this powerful Jedi. And it also makes us think that likely Supreme Leader Snoke probably wasn't ever going to be the big bad villain in the same way that Emperor Palpatine was in the original trilogy, and that Abrams had always at least hoped or wanted to bring the story back around to Palpatine to properly finish the Skywalker saga. Palpatine was a key part of the prequel trilogy. He was, the puppeteer behind Vader and the Empire in the original trilogy, and now it seems that maybe he's been behind the First Order, or he's at least been biding his time, and maybe we'll end up using Kylo Ren in some way to help push forth what he didn't get to achieve in Return of the Jedi. But it would seem that at the very least, maybe the larger threads of what Abrams introduced in The Force Awakens have not been disturbed by any decisions that Rian Johnson made in The Last Jedi. At the same time, he could also just be playing nice and not wanting to, throw any bad words towards Rian Johnson simply because, I'm sure that they're friendly and there's no reason to throw another guy under the bus in this kind of situation.
Right. HT, I know you're a big fan of The Last Jedi, and do these comments put you at ease at all about the notion, the speculation that's been out there about how Abrams might potentially sort of rewrite and retcon some of the events that happened in The Last Jedi? Does hearing him say that he's not going to really do that, or imply that he's not really going to do that, make you feel any better about The Rise of Skywalker?
I'm still nervous. I'm still very nervous just by the presence of Palpatine. But it does, I guess I have confidence, hopefully. I have hope. That's what I'm trying to say. I have hope that J.J. Abrams is being true to his word. And, of course, everything that Rian Johnson did have whatever permission from the Lucasfilm Story Group too, so it's not like he completely derailed whatever plans that were initially set in place when J.J. Abrams took over with Force Awakens to begin with. So I'm sure there was some back and forth between them, and J.J. Abrams won't outright rewrite everything that Rian Johnson did. So yeah, I have hope.
Chris, what about you? Same question. I know you're a big fan of Last Jedi as well. Like what do you make of this?
I mean, I don't know. I'll feel better after I see the movie, or I'll feel worse. I don't know. But I like J.J. Abrams. I like The Force Awakens. I love The Last Jedi. I hope this has a exciting conclusion, but I still can't get over the whole Emperor thing. I mean, again, I'm willing to give it a chance, and I hope it does work in the context of the movie, but I continue to think bringing the Emperor back in any way is a really lazy idea. Especially, I don't want to get in a rant here, but like if the last two movies they had kept hinting at that, like, oh, the Emperor is out there, then I'd be like, that's fine. But there's been no mention, even like a hint of this, and now it's like, oh, by the way, he's on the poster now, and it just seems really, really lazy to me. But I hope I'm wrong. I hope it ends up working really well.
So
Chris, I actually would recommend going back and watching Force Awakens and Last Jedi, because there are some shots, and I won't say where because I think it should be a surprise, where if you go frame by frame and look in the background, you see the cloaked figure of the Emperor just in the background snickering.
Oh, wow. I'll have to look for this. Now I'm intrigued.
Strings around his fingers too.
Oh.
All right, so we're going to move on from this in just one second. But Chris, I wonder what you think about the idea, and I don't know anything about the Rise of Skywalker, what's going to happen. So this is just pure speculation on my part. What if it's not the actual living Emperor? What if it's just he's a Force ghost, or it's more about like his legacy, or his influence, and it's not as literal as it seems to be right now. Would that strike you better?
I don't know. It still seems lazy to me, but I'd feel a lot better if it was like a flashback rather than he's still alive in some way. Like, right. I don't know. He's a robot now. Like, no, I don't need any of that. Like, just stop.
Okay. All right. So let's move on to Poe Dameron. Brad, what do we know about what the Rise of Skywalker is going to reveal about Poe?
He's very handsome.
Oh yeah.
But no. So Oscar Isaac plays Poe Dameron in the new Star Wars trilogy. And he's basically been portrayed as a little bit of a Han Solo type. He's kind of got that roguish attitude about him, a little bit of a rebel, even though he's part of the Resistance and not the Rebel Alliance. Pow, 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 pow. But he doesn't really have much of a backstory that has been revealed within the movies themselves. There have been some comic books that show different missions that he's gone on and things like that have expanded his character a bit. But we don't really know much about his past before he was part of the Resistance. And it sounds like the movie might give us a little bit more insight into that, based on an interview that he had with the Associated Press during the D23 Expo. And Oscar Isaac said, quote, "Particularly with Poe, I think people will be surprised to see that he has a bit more of an ambiguous past. He's not just kind of that squeaky clean flyboy." And so far we've seen Poe Dameron as this, Resistance pilot, the best one that they have. Definitely a hero type, always trying to do the right thing, even if he screws up like he did in The Last Jedi. But it seems like there might be more to his background that we don't know about, and I think that that's probably tied to the new character that Kerry Russell is playing, who's called Zori Bliss. She's a smuggler, bounty hunter type. We've seen some pictures of her from the Vanity Fair spread. She kind of looks like the Rocketeer, wearing a dark purple bodysuit and a shiny golden helmet. And it was recently revealed at D23 that Poe Dameron and Zori Bliss have a bit of a history, but they wouldn't elaborate on that. But thanks to Vanity Fair, we know that Zori Bliss, we will meet her in this place called the Thieves' Quarter on this new snow-dusted planet called Kijimi, or Kihimi, however it's going to be pronounced. So I'm willing to bet that Poe Dameron was probably a smuggler like Han Solo, maybe even a thief who worked with Zori Bliss and before the Resistance, and maybe wasn't always on the side of the Resistance.
Well, I mean, again, we don't know enough about this to do anything beyond just speculate, but like, to me, this sounds great because it will hopefully bring some more shades to Poe's character. And as you've said, Brad, he's sort of been, I mean, he's great. I love Oscar Isaac, and I really like that character, but he has been sort of one note throughout the first two movies in this trilogy. So, anything that could provide him with a little bit more complexity and some more shading to that character, I think has to be a good thing, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's definitely nice to have characters who aren't just heroes or villains, but are a little bit more complex and have different sides to them that you might not expect.
Cool. All right, so let's move on to Netflix. Netflix is apparently trying something a little bit different for one of its shows. HT, what do we know here?
So the Great British Baking Show released its newest season on Netflix this week, but viewers noticed that it wasn't the entire season as Netflix has been doing in the past. Its binge-watching model has been something that's kind of pioneered ever since it released its original titles like House of Cards and Orange is the New Black. But with the newest season of the Great British Baking Show, it only released the season premiere, and it will be shifting to a week-to-week release for this season, kind of in a simultaneous release of the show as it airs in the UK on Channel 4. So this is something that Netflix is shifting to for the Great British Baking Show and for another series called Rhythm and Flow. Although it's actually not quite an entirely new release model that they've been doing. They've experimented with other shows like The Patriot Act with Hassan Minhaj and Chelsea Handler's Chelsea Talk shows, which were released in a weekly format, and K-dramas as well, which they have which have come from international studios, have been released in a weekly format additionally. So this is something that they may or may not be testing out, and it has some people speculating that this could be a release model that Netflix might be leaning into more as its competitors start to grow.
Yeah, and we know that Disney Plus is going to be releasing its shows in a weekly format. Chris, you cover the streaming world pretty regularly. Do you think that the releasing all at once thing that Netflix sort of pioneered, do you think that is essential to Netflix's brand, or do you think that they've established themselves as a giant in this industry right now and that they can afford to experiment?
I've seen a lot of people complaining about the binge model these days, and I get it. It does seem like with the binge model, something comes and goes like in the blink of an eye. Like it feels like we're already over like Mindhunter, even though that just came out like a week ago and it was great, but now we've already moved on. So on one hand, I get wanting things to slow down and wanting to savor them more, but I watched the Great British Bake Off and I was excited when I saw like, oh, new episodes coming out. I thought it was going to be the whole season, and then when I saw it was one at a time, I was like, oh, that kind of sucks. Like I don't know if it's because I'm so used to getting everything at once or what, but I think Netflix is tied to that and they should probably stick with it, but I don't know. I guess it remains to be seen.
HT, do you think that this is going to be something where, like, the next season of Stranger Things, for example, could be released week to week? Like, what do we know about Netflix's plans to potentially implement this strategy in the future?
So for now, Netflix released a statement on Twitter saying that licensed titles like the Great British Baking Show and another reality series, Rhythm and Flow, will be released weekly. But it's not something that's happening with more shows than that for now. So it seems like it's something that's happening with more licensed titles or reality programming versus original titles that are made in-house like Stranger Things.
Okay, gotcha. All right, let's move on to our final news story of the day, and that is a potential It Supercut. I don't remember if we talked about this when it first sort of began, when rumors about it first began circling not too long ago. But I guess just in case we haven't, Chris, tell us about what this might be and the latest about it.
Right. So Andy Muschietti, the director of It and the upcoming It Chapter 2, has teased in the past the idea of not just a director's cut, but a supercut that would edit both It and It Chapter 2 together into like one big massive movie. And it wouldn't just be splicing the two movies together. It would be kind of like how the book is laid out, where it jumps back and forth between past and present. So, in the past, Andy Muschietti has said he wants to do that. In a new interview, he confirmed that he's actually in talks with the studio, which would be either Warner Brothers or New Line, depending on who owns what. But he's actually in talks with the studio to make it happen. And if it does, it'll be something like a 6.5 hour extravaganza, which I would love to see, honestly, just because I'm a fan of the book, I'm a fan of the movies, and I would just be very curious to see how that turns out.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge fan of the book as well, and you just wrote or just published a review of it, Chapter 2, and I'll link to that in the show notes as well, so people can get a chance to check that out, and the movie comes out this week. I actually had a chance to speak with Andy Muschietti myself, and I asked him, like, could you tell me about some of the new material that you would want to include if this ends up happening? And he said basically that he couldn't really talk about it too much, but one of the things is something from the book, like some new footage that he wants to include. And then another thing is related to a resolution of the perpetrators of Adrian Mellon's beating. So I'm not going to get into what that means, but people who have read the book may have their flags raised and understand what's going on there. Maybe later this week I'll play that interview in full on the podcast. But so that's interesting. So Chris, you already said you're interested in seeing this. I certainly am too. Do you think that the editing styles, that these two stories will mesh together in a supercut in a similar way that they do in the book? Because, like you said, it's sort of threaded throughout. It's not like one story and then the other, but that one story and then the other model is very much how the films play out. So do you think they'll be able to weave those two things seamlessly into a supercut like this?
I don't know if I would say seamlessly, but I actually think it would work, and I actually think it would make Chapter 2 a better movie, because one of the problems I had with it, Chapter 2, is that it really doesn't hold up on its own. And I got a lot of guff for saying this on Twitter, because people are like, well, no, duh, it's part 2. But like, you can sit down and you can watch Terminator 2 without having immediately rewatched Terminator 1. This movie, I feel like if you don't immediately watch it part 1 first and then see this almost feels like a lesser movie. Like, this really feels like a continuation of stuff that happened in the first movie in ways that a lot of other sequels don't. And I really think that's just because it really wasn't ever intended to be two stories. It was always written, by Stephen King as one big story. And I think that really shows in this film. So I do think editing them together could work.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, and I think especially like the idea of the fictional town of Derry, Maine, as like a place that is infected with this sickness is an idea that is portrayed really well in the first movie and is almost completely like forgotten about in the second movie. And Muschietti said in the interview with him that I did, where he was like, yeah, he basically, I'm paraphrasing here, but he basically said, like, it's established in the first movie. I'm guessing a lot of people are going to rewatch the first one, right into, right before they see this. And, like, I don't know if that's a great assumption that you can make, because everybody's busy, and I don't know. It just seemed like, I don't know. I guess I agree with you is where I boiled down there. But HT and Brad, what do you guys think about a potential 6+ hour It supercut? Is that anything that you would be interested in sitting down and watching?
I just think it's funny that already the first film is longer than the original 1980s miniseries, so this is going to be like twice the length of that. I don't know. I liked the first It. I haven't yet seen the second one, although I've heard, I think, some mixed things. So I'll have to see what I think about the second film before I sit down for 6 hours of that.
Brad, what do you think?
I mean, I'm definitely interested if it, is an entirely new cut that bridges the stories together in a way that has it going back and forth between the kids and the adults. I think that's probably a better way to do it than separating it in the way, especially with what Chris has said about Chapter 2. But since, again, I haven't seen Chapter 2 yet, so I don't necessarily know how I feel about it. Maybe I'll be perfectly fine with it, and I won't need a supercut. But, if he's going to introduce maybe some new footage that is not in either movie, or it creates new context, or just a better flow for the overall story, then I would probably be willing to check it out.
Cool. Yeah, hopefully we'll have that opportunity, and we'll bring you more news with the Supercut as soon as it's like officially confirmed, because right now it's still in the early discussion phases. But all right, yeah, I think that's going to bring us to the end of today's episode of Slash Film Daily. And again, I'm going to link to Chris's It Chapter 2 review in the show notes, so check that out there. Let's tell people where they can find more of our work online. HC, let's start with you.
You can find me writing every day at slashfilm.com, and I'm on Twitter at HTranBuoy.
Chris?
I'm also at slashfilm.com, and I'm on Twitter at Evangelista413.
Brad?
Slashfilm.com, of course, at Ethan_Anderton on Twitter, and my own stupid podcast, Go Flix Yourself, on iTunes and other podcasting platforms.
You can find me on slashfilm.com. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Ben Pearson, and you can find all of the other stories that we talked about on today's show at slashfilm.com. You can subscribe to the show. It's published every weekday, bringing you the most exciting news from the world of movies and TV, as well as deeper dives into the great features you can find on the site. Hit us up on iTunes, Google Podcasts, Overcast, Spotify, all the popular podcast apps, and send your feedback, questions, comments, and concerns to us at peter@slashfilm.com. Make sure to leave your name and general geographic location in case we mention your email on the air. Don't forget also to rate and review the podcast on iTunes. It helps us out a lot. Tell your friends about the show, spread the word. Thank you for listening, and we will talk to you tomorrow.